getting book reviews, editorial types of book reviews. It can feel a little complicated to authors, especially if you're a first time author or an indie author who might have never had to do it before. That's why Jode Millman is here with us. And we're going to be talking about reviews. What can book reviewers tell you as an author? Jode Millman is a multi-award winning mystery author of the true crime inspired The Queen City Crime series. She's an IP attorney, a book reviewer for Book Trib, and the creator of the Writers Law School. Jode, thanks for talking with us. I appreciate it.
Nice to be here, Desiree.
All right, let's get into it. Can you just kind of give us a lay of the land, understanding the craft of being a book reviewer? What does that mean when you are a professional book reviewer?
Well, it really means that you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to the author and you have a responsibility to the reader. And both of those really it's two divergent interests that you really have to take into account when you're writing your review. So it's really interesting because I was invited to become a book reviewer by booktrib.com by Meryl Moss, who is a PR extraordinaire, and she is the one who created booktrib.com. And I was one of her authors and one of her clients. And she asked me if I was interested in writing book reviews. Now, I did not know anything about writing a book review when I started. So I had to read a lot to understand that you're giving a description of the plot. You're talking about the characters. You're talking about the theme, and you're also really making a recommendation to all of the readers who are out there about whether or not you like the book.
And let's dig into a little bit of the misconceptions that are out there about book reviews, because what you're describing is a professional book review. You have a format for doing it. And like you said, you have those obligations. How does that differ, for example, between a consumer review or a verified review on Amazon? Because there's different types of reviews.
Well, it's interesting because I look at those from the opposite side as a writer. And what's interesting is that when I read the verified reviews or I read the Amazon reviews, sometimes I get the impression that the reader is trying to get something off their chest. They are, they summarize the plot, but they take a much more slanted perspective than somebody like myself. From my perspective, I never review a book that I don't like because I don't believe in bashing other writers. Other writers have spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, committed a vast amount of time to creating this work. So when I get, my list of books and I start to read them, if I don't like a book, I'm not going to finish it. I'm not going to review it because I don't think that's fair to myself to waste my time or to that author to be bashed. So generally, when you read my works, when you read my reviews, what you're going to be getting is hopefully an objective perspective on that story, which I don't think you get from the Amazon reviewers or the verified readers.
Yeah. And on Amazon too, a verified reader is Amazon's way of saying this person bought the book.
Correct.
That's what that means.
Correct.
And other folks can review books. Those are unverified. So they have like this pecking order, which can be good or bad. I think too, especially when it comes to an editorial review like you've done, or Kirkus, for example, I like to use them a lot of times as an example. When you say you're not going to review a book if you don't like it, a lot of times too, that review can go back to the author and they can decide whether or not they want to have it published.
Well, it's also, to me, the biggest compliment is when I'll post a review or it'll appear on Book Trib or it'll appear on my website or somewhere, and the author contacts me. Like Patty Callahan Henry used a line out of my review on her website. And I've gotten, emails from people like Ann Cleve saying, thanks for the review. To me, that's the payback because I don't get paid to write the reviews. My payment is getting a free copy of the book. And I do it because I like to read. And also I'm learning as a writer. When I read other people's books across the genres, I'm learning. As it's part of an educational process for me. But getting back to Amazon, you're right. The verified readers are people who bought the book. And what I try to do is, for example, I will also post my book trip reviews on Amazon, on BookBub, on various websites to reach out to other readers. I mean, I think that's the important thing, reaching out to tell people how excited you are about a particular book.
Yeah. And okay, there's a lot of different directions I want to go here. So, well, because too, you're an author who became a book reviewer. And I think that's a path that people are possibly intrigued with.
Mhm.
And I think too, by doing that, like you were saying, you learn more about the craft of writing because you're approaching it from that different perspective. So tell me a little bit about your criteria when you're evaluating a book. Are there things that you look for right away? Are you looking at the genre and the tropes? What is it that you're actually looking at?
Well, first, I look for the author because there's certain authors that I really like to read, and I like to see their progress in their career. For example, Louise Penny and Anne Cleves, Tara French. There are people like that and also people who I've read just for fun. I want to read their next book. I forget the name of the gentleman, Nelson. It was the one about the children that explode. And I read that book and I said, oh, he's got a new one out. I want to, read the new one. I'll read classics like Humpta Lahiri or Don DeLillo. I mean, I read across the genre. So genre is not my criteria. First, the criteria is the author. And then I will look, for example, at what the publisher describes, gives me a short description of the plot. Is this something that I'm going to be interested in? Because I mean, we only have so many hours in the day and we can only commit ourselves to read so many books. So, I mean, I get solicited, honestly, I get solicited almost every day in my inbox from PR people asking me to read their books. But generally, the first thing that attracts me is the author. And then it will be the description of the book. And sometimes people will contact me with someone who's brand new. I don't want anybody to think that I don't read new authors because I do read new authors. And sometimes that's exciting. I'll hear, either through Publishers Weekly or some of the trades about a new up and coming book that's coming out in the future. And if it sounds really exciting, I'll jump in.
Yeah. And I think too, a lot of folks, if they're curious about getting their little toe wet, NetGalley is a great place where you can
Perfect.
review books. You can sign up to be a book reviewer there, whether you're very much like yourself, you're an
Mhm.
author and then you blog and you post about it. If you are writing for a newspaper or a literary journal or your press, media, librarians, bookstore buyers. That's a nice aggregate of all sorts of different types of folks who are potentially reading books. And then I think, too, the whole idea of how that review then is used to promote that
Yes.
book and author. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, reviews have become the lifeblood for writers. They need them, especially if your book is on Amazon, because Amazon rates authors by the number of reviews they receive. So, for example, if you want to buy an ad from Amazon, that rating is taken into account based upon the number of reviews you have. It really they're important. However, being an author, you have to develop a very tough hide, because you can't take every review seriously. You can't get that high with, hey, I got 5 stars, and then experience a low saying, oh, I only got 1 star. First of all, I don't really like the star system at all. I understand there has to be some kind of objective system, but I really think that it's very easy especially for a new writer to get on that review roller coaster with, good reviews and bad reviews. A lot of it's building confidence in yourself. But
One of the night.
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go keep going.
Well, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
It's okay. I was just going to say that one of the nice things about an editorial type review, like we've been talking about a little bit with Kirkus, for example,
Mhm.
you do have to, and you pay for that review. And
Yes.
Kirkus does pay their book reviewers too. So there's different types of levels. But the nice thing about a review like that, or an editorial type review, is a lot of times you can get it many months in advance of your book being ready to be published. Your ARC or your advanced reading copy can be sent to them. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, if you get a bad review and you still have time to edit it, how can an author maybe take that review and turn that negative into positive, right?
It's funny. I once went to see a play on Broadway, and it was King Kong, and it was a friend of ours was one of the producers, so we were invited to opening night, and the play was absolutely horrible. When you picked up the newspapers, the reviews were best thing since peanut butter. Do you know what I mean? The way that their PR people were so clever, they took all of the bad reviews about this play and they picked out that one thing. And the one thing was a monkey, this King Kong character, which was the size of the stage and leaned over into the audience. And that became the centerpiece of that review. And going forward, occasionally I'll get a bad review, but if I get one that's kind of edgy, then it's easy for you to take it and tweak it. It really is. You don't have to use every single word that's in that review. There are ways to massage bad reviews. And again, when you're putting it, for example, you mentioned, you get you have the advanced copies way in advance. You get your reviews, so then you're able to include some of them on your jacket or inside the cover. You're only going to be taking, maybe 10 words from a review anyway. So you can pick the best 10 words that you've got. And that's another thing that I try to do at the end of my reviews. I always have, I don't want to call it, I call it a log line, that if the author likes, they can take that and it's tailor made to use for their PR materials.
Yeah, that little blurb or
Right.
pull quote that you can take off.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And it is nice when you have the leisurely amount of time, if you do get that negative editorial review or you find a plot hole. We've done this actually too. Even with NetGalley, somebody found a plot hole. The nice thing is the books wasn't gone through the final proofing, so the author could go in and fix it without putting out a book that had that plot hole. And now you're talking too about the back cover blurbs and how to use it from a marketing and PR perspective. Other thoughts and ideas of where people can post their reviews?
Well, obviously, they should use social media. You've got LinkedIn, of course. You get Instagram and Facebook. BookBub doesn't let you do that, which is really kind of interesting. And another thing that I would like people to know is that when you are on Amazon, every author is entitled to a free Amazon page that you create. And on that page, it gives you a space to list your editorial reviews. And that is really something that every author should take advantage of. And, if you win an award or you're a finalist or, you get, let's say, Lee Child to write a blurb for you. It doesn't have to be a reviewer. It can be a friend who's a writer. Put it on that editorial review page on your Amazon page. It makes a world of difference.
That is such great advice. And I agree 100%. Utilizing the editorial review space on your Amazon page. And you bring up endorsements or praise. A lot of times it's referred to as advanced praise as well. And getting another author, I think there's some good advice there that maybe we can talk about a little bit. I would love to get a review from Lee Child, but Lee Child doesn't know me. He's going to be like, what? Because much like you were saying before, Jody, you get approached every day for reviews. And big name authors get approached probably every hour for reviews. So, you want to talk a little bit about how an author might get other authors or
Mhm.
people that they aspire to write like to review their book?
Well, it's funny, when I was writing my first book, I did a cold. I went to Louise Penny's website and just wrote her a little note. I wrote a book, blah 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 blah, and I got a rejection letter from her saying, "I'm sorry, congratulations on writing, but I can't review any books." To me, and I framed that, and it's in my office. It's the best rejection letter I ever received. But there are a couple of ways that you can get other people to write you praise. First is that talk to your publisher, because if your publisher will hook you up with other writers in your similar genre who will then be able to write reviews for you. So that's number one, use your publisher. The second is attend writing conferences and network. Get to know other authors, famous ones, or someone who's just a debut author like you. I mean, that is really a key to doing that. Also, talk to, if you have an agent, talk to your agent. And your agent might be representing another client who is in your genre or who could write a praise for you. But a lot of it's hard work. It's not easy. You're going to get a lot of no's, but you don't need a lot of no's. Maybe you need, 3 or 4 yeses out of the 20 or 30 requests that you make.
Yeah. Another thing that I think authors can do is, much like you were saying earlier, if you get a description of the book that you can send to people,
Mhm.
or zeroing in a little bit on, dear Lee Child, you write such great suspense
Right.
thrillers. My book is very suspenseful too because it does this, that, and the other. So you can kind of give them a little nudge in the direction that you might want them to go, and therefore help them, because again, they're inundated and in many ways just overwhelmed. Can we talk a little bit about the timing of this?
Oh,
Because
yes.
when you were asking and trying to solicit reviews matters, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, if you have the luxury of knowing that your book is going to be released 6 or 8 months in advance, make sure that you have your arc, I would say at least 4 months in advance, if not longer than that. Because if you want to be reviewed by somebody like Publishers Weekly, they won't take a book, they won't even look at it if it's within that 4 month period. And a lot of literary journals are like that. A lot of important review sites will not take a book if it's shorter than that 4 month period. Okay, that's the first thing to keep in mind. This another thing is that one of the great disservices I think publishers do is not allowing authors to have that time to go ahead and submit, and and also to provide them with an arc, because some publishing houses are small mom and pops, so they won't get you that material in time. And that's really, I mean, that's what I found. I've had personal experience with that, where I haven't had the arcs in enough time. Another source, especially if you're a debut writer, you might want to talk to a PR agent if you can afford to talk to someone who does PR or marketing, and they will take those arcs for you, and they will send it out to a list of contacts that they have. And that's another excellent way to get newspaper coverage, to get library coverage. I mean, there's so to get into bookstores, for bookstore events. Booking events is also something you have to do at least 6 months in advance. For example, if I have a new book that's coming out, let's say in a year, I know what the date is. I'm out ahead of libraries and trying to get excitement stirred up in advance. But there's so many ways. I mean, a lot of it is legwork. A lot of it's on the writer. But it's worth it in the long run to get those blurbs.
Jody, as somebody who does marketing and PR for authors, you are speaking my love language now. Yeah, and I can't tell you too. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think this conversation is important, so that the author understands the timing and who does what.
Mhm.
because quite often I'll have a new author come to me and say, "Hey, guess what? My book is releasing in a month. Can you get me a back cover blurb for it?" And I say, "Well, isn't your back cover art already completed?" "Yes, it is." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Well, I can get you a blurb, but you have to communicate with your book cover designer or
Yes.
your publisher." And to your point, sometimes those small indie presses, the hybrid presses that are out there, we
Mhm.
have all these levels of different kinds of publishers and presses nowadays that can make confusing too. And those little presses might not necessarily even know or think or be planning or strategizing. Um, any further tips or advice for that first time author who's now sitting there going, wait, I got to do this, I got to do that? What do you want them to actually say to their publisher so that they know what to expect in terms of their back cover blurbs or their reviews?
Well, most publishers, when you sign a contract, as you know, there should be a calendar attached to your contract which lists the dates and the obligations for what the author has to do and what the publisher has to do. And one of those things, and one of the key things, is when will the arc be ready? Try to get as much time between the arc, which is your advanced reader's copy, and publishing as possible. Should be 6 months if you're lucky. That gives you enough time to plan and strategize about how to promote your book and how to get those reviews and how to get those blurbs. Because reviews and blurbs are really two different things. A review, as we've talked about, is someone like myself who reads books, for a living, or reads them for the purpose of an editorial review. A blurb is more like an endorsement. No, so I don't want people to get confused about that. One's an endorsement, and the other is really an objective review of the book. But you need time, 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 as much time as possible.
Thank you for breaking that down. I see that a lot of times where it's confusing too. It's blurb and the back cover, all the copy. I've heard those used interchangeably, and it's not the book
It's not.
description.
You
Yeah,
know, if
yeah.
you look at the back cover, I mean, it really does include, it can include, your little blurb and endorsement, but generally it's that description of your book that's real. That's, that when people think about it, people standing in an airport and they're looking for something to read on a plane, you want to pick it up and have it be so compelling that they want to buy the book. That's, a tremendous piece of marketing. Really, really polish that, you know, and, because that's what's also going to go on Amazon. That's a description that is going to go on Barnes and Noble. That's a description that's really going to sell your book. And I'm trying to think, when I receive books from publishing companies, that they'll give me that description. And you know what else they'll give me? If, let's say that you're writing your second or third book and you really haven't had time to get any reviews of the current book, because they're sending it out to reviewers to get the review of that current book, they will use previous books. They'll use the blurbs from previous books. They'll use the reviews from previous books as a hook to say, oh, the New York Times said this was a great book. So book two must be great. But so book three must be really great. So, once you start to accumulate that information, use it. Just don't discard it because you're in your third book in a series.
Yeah. Oh, you have such great advice, Jody. Okay. And I just want to underscore one more thing because you touched on it earlier as far as pulling out the pull quote or the little pithy bit of information. I just want to acknowledge that I think that's one of the things that sets a professional reviewer apart too
Mhm.
from the verified or the consumer reviewers, because you're going to know, very much like that other author will know if they're going to blurb your book as well. They're going to know how to give you that little pithy thing, that blurb you can put on the back cover, because it's going to be one sentence, but it's going to be impactful. And sometimes the consumer reviewers, they don't quite know that. And then you, as an author, if you're trying to pull out something from that consumer review, it's hard because they didn't give you that nice little chunk of text to use.
Sometimes consumer reviews seems like they have an axe to grind, and a lot of
Mhm.
these people, um, are readers, but they've never actually sat down at a typewriter and tried to write a book. And that, I think that's what gives me the perspective. Like, I know how much work goes into this, and I know how much polishing, where sometimes consumer readers don't. They're looking at it from a very simple point of view, just as a reader, which I appreciate, and I appreciate every reader out there. But it's a different reading it from a different perspective, as you say.
Yeah. And something that a professional book reviewer will never do is say something to the effect of, I usually don't read romance, but
Right,
I picked up this book.
right.
That's the kind of thing a novice will say, or maybe somebody's Aunt Betty. What do you think about people getting their family, their sixth grade English teacher to,
English teacher wouldn't be so bad, but their aunt, I don't think so. And also, I think book reviewers are much more nuanced. They can, for example, you can write a book and you really like it, but it had a flaw. There's a way that a nuanced book reviewer is going to add that in there. Not in a sharp way where a consumer, often they pick out one little flaw in the book and that's what they go with. Where for a book reviewer, it's not, you're not nitpicking. You're there to tell the whole story about this book.
exactly. And if you read a lot of book reviews too, I do.
I do too.
So, sometimes can you do this, Jody, where you start kind of reading the subtext in that review and you're
Yes,
like, yeah, you want to talk
yes,
about that a little bit?
yes. Well, again, it's like what is not said as opposed to what is said. When you write a book, there's the white space is very important in a book. Similar to a book review, often what is not said can be equally as important. You can't quote it, but you as you said, you're getting the gist. And each book reviewer has their own style. So people, if maybe hopefully they'd say, oh, Jody's reviewed this book, I like the way that Jody writes her book reviews, and so they'll read that review because it's from me. So I mean, that's also a stylistic event which book writers have to develop. And as you said, let's go back to NetGalley a little bit, because anybody can become a book reviewer. You sign up for NetGalley. It's absolutely free. You can pick any genre that you want, but in exchange for receiving that book, it really is incumbent upon you to write a review. It's those, as I said before, are the lifeblood of authors. So you're getting something for free. Even you don't have to write a long thing. Just rate it, just so that writer knows that you've gone ahead and used NetGalley. Another one is Edelweiss Plus. I don't know if you've ever used that one. It's a little bit more difficult to navigate, but that's also a free service where anybody can become a book reviewer, and they're great. And with NetGalley, you can also ask them to distribute it to the publisher, which is really interesting. I do that all the time. And I'll hear from the publishers. And as a book reviewer, the more you write and the more published you are with, let's say, a certain publishing company, they will solicit you.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. We do have NetGalley. We subscribe for our authors and we post our authors' arcs there. And I can say too, to underscore your point about making sure you write and post that review, is we can see, by the way, there's dashboards and analytics. So if you're reviewing on NetGalley, you don't necessarily see the fact that you are being scored based on how frequently you review books.
Right.
We can even see the
That's
number
right.
of times you
That's
request
right.
a review opposed to how many times you give a review. And if you've ever requested a book and then you get denied, it might be because maybe you're not pulling, your weight and living up to your side of the bargain. Okay, Jody, we're against the clock, but you've mentioned your own writing and your own books, and we'll be posting links. The team is posting links in the chat as we do this. But tell us, if you could, about your book.
Well, my books, it's the Queen City Crime series, and they're inspired by local crimes which have occurred here in the Hudson Valley, and with which for a few of them, I've had a personal connection. So it's been really interesting for me to develop a series where my characters, we take the seed, or I take the seedling of this actual true crime, and then insert my characters into that situation. How will they deal with the drowning in a kayak on the Hudson River when the victim happens to be the ex-boyfriend of my protagonist? Or what about the teacher, the favorite teacher in high school who murders someone who's trespassed through the yard, and he calls my protagonist to say, "Hey, I need help." And it's really exciting for me to be able to tell these stories and to create these characters. I've been doing it for a while, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm switching gears. I'm trying to work on something new, but I'm not going to leave my series behind. As I said, I'm setting my characters on vacation for a little while.
I understand. Sometimes they need to go and explore and do their things. Jode Millman, thank you so much for being with us on the Book Fest. You're going to have to come back, and maybe we'll have you on another panel or in another event, because you're an amazing writer. You're an incredible book reviewer. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.